Hello and welcome back. So when we last left off, we had this module here that allows us to change some custom parameters, which sends those values out to Lisa controller, and we get this nice control of our objects. And we can go ahead, we can change that to object 2, and now we have control over object 2. And this works very nicely. We do run into a couple of issues, however. So if I move 2 over here and I go back to object 1, we're still left with object 2's parameters. So when I go to move 1, it's going to jump. The same thing is going to happen if, I'm moving object 1 around from TouchDesigner, but then someone goes and moves object 1 inside of Lisa controller. When I go back to make a change here, again, its value is going to jump. So we don't want that to happen. So we need some sort of feedback mechanism where Lisa controller is sending data back to TouchDesigner and updating that within the module. So Lisa controller can send OSC back out. So if we go to settings to OSC, here is by default, we get this machine as a device to send OSC to. It sends, again, by default to port 9000. And I'm just going to turn on the send to parameter. And then if I come to sources, I'm going to select all of them, click assign, and click this machine. So now all of these sources, if I move them around, they're going to be sending OSC out to port 9000. So I'm going to come inside of my module here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create an OSC in chop. Change that to port 9000. And there we go. We've got OSC data coming in right now just with our pan and distance. Okay, beautiful. So next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to call this Lisa feedback. Now I'm going to make myself a constant chop. I'm going to right click on this parameter and choose edit parameter. I'm actually going to make a list here. And what I want to do is just have 4 channels. Each one, the name is going to be the OSC string that we're looking for with the ID that the component is currently set to. So I can do ext source / curly brackets key dot format me.parent.var ID. And then I can just copy and paste this and edit it for each parameter. And then in here, we'll just make sure this is set to Python reference. There we go. And now I can use a replace chop. And so basically what this is doing is just saying we're using these strings to look up the most recent values. And if we open parent parameters, right now it's set to source 1. If I set it to source 2, it's going to look up those parameters for source 2, which are currently not in here. And all I got to do is just move source 2 around a little bit, and we get those parameters coming in. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this to not a null, actually a bind chop. And what the bind chop allows us to do is something similar to a chop export. So if I click and drag this parameter, this channel onto my pan parameter, I have the option to export chop. But what I'm actually going to do is chop bind, and it creates this little Python expression and it binds that parameter. So what will happen is if I move object 2 around, we see that updating. But I can also just go ahead and click and drag this without breaking that expression or breaking that reference, which is what would happen with the chop export or a Python reference. So I'm going to do that for the rest of these parameters. Now there is a problem with the way it does this by default. So it uses the channel name as opposed to the channel index. So if I were to change the ID of the or the source that I'm targeting to 3, okay, there we go. Took a second to register, but it breaks that because it has changed the name, and so this channel no longer exists basically. So what I can do to get around that is just change it to the index. And now when I change the object that I'm targeting, it doesn't matter that these names are changing because it's looking up by index, not name. Another way to solve that would just be with a rename chop. And so whatever's coming in here, it would just get renamed to PWDE, and we wouldn't have to worry about breaking any of our references. Okay. So now that we have these bound, though, we've got this expression in here. We've got a reference. So how, what if I've got some sort of data that I just want to be, spitting out of TouchDesigner into the Lisa controller? Because this is really, the idea here is not that I'm going to be manually changing these parameters, but that the parameters are going to be referencing some sort of other data. So let's just emulate that with sand noise chop. PWD, turn on time slicing. I'm going to change this just a little bit so we have the correct range. The period a little bit. And we could use an in chop. I'm just going to actually use a select chop. And what I can actually do is insert an override. Fantastic. And that's how we can get that data in there. And of course, so this is, a constantly changing noise chop. But let's emulate this a little bit differently. I'm going to change op type to constant. Okay. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, these have to be strings. There we go. Oh, that's not going to work like that. Hey, look at that. Okay, so let's just make this separate channels. Okay, beautiful, 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 beautiful. And so now we have this way that We can control it from with data from somewhere else and just override those parameters. We can control it directly. And we can also have, uh-oh. Oh, that's source one. That's why. Where did 5 go? There you are. Okay. And we can have this coming in. The other nice thing about this is that, so right now I'm on source 5, but as I'm moving source 14 around, what's happening is in here, get rid of these panes. There we go. What's happening in here is we're still getting the parameters updating in here. So when I go to source 14, it's going to automatically update to the last position that we had. Oops. So fairly simple to get that working. Next, we will talk about doing extensions. So writing Python extensions that allow us to write custom functions and custom variables for this component as a whole. Until then, thanks for watching.